Yeah, I can see this now, live.
We are live. So there we go. We'll just give people a few minutes to check in, and then we'll start having a little chat. So we've got two of us here. So I'm Tania Miller. I'm a McTimoney chiropractor and I'm a SERPA practitioner. And if you'd like to introduce yourself as well.
My name is Teresa Mack, and I'm an emotional well-being consultant and grief coach and mentor. And yeah, we're just going to talk about grief today, aren't we?
We are, yes. And we've got a few people have joined us, which is good.
I can't see that, yeah.
Okay, well, we'll just leave it a couple of minutes and then see who else turns in. And then we'll get going because it'll be recorded anyway. So, yeah. Well, let's get going.
Cool. Right. So it's okay to talk about grief, we both discovered. And I thought I'd ask you first about what your personal experience with grief is like. Maybe explain to people how we ended up doing this talk together.
Well, in the last 2 years, I've lost both my parents. And that kind of working through that has prompted me to, I like talking about it actually. And I think a lot of people are afraid to talk about it. So I thought it would be good to have a chat and talk to other people about it and maybe help people if they need some tips. I mean, for me, my experience as a SERPA practitioner and the things that I've learned helped me through my grief.
Can you tell us a little bit more, like what tools did you use rather than like just talking to people, or what else was there?
I would say journaling. Journaling is something that helped me. I wrote to my parents, you know, when they were gone, then I could still talk to them and you can just tell them that you miss them. Say things that perhaps you didn't get a chance to say. I found that really useful. My mum had cancer, so we had 7 weeks from diagnosis to when she died. And so I was able to kind of deal with some of my feelings again with writing. I found it really helpful to just offload how I felt. I think one of the other things that was useful from learning the SERPA work was to allow myself to sit with it and allow myself to be upset, and not to feel that I needed to suppress it, but just one day I said to my mum, I'm feeling, you know, I'm having a sad moment, and she said, "Oh, why?" Because you're dying.
Oh dear.
But I think I didn't feel like I needed to bottle it up, so I was very open about it, and me and my sisters were all like quite open about how we felt, and perhaps we might have just suppressed things a bit more if we didn't know about this type of work. So I found that really helpful, and to ask other people for help as well, and to share it and just be really open. I was really open with my clients as well about what was going on.
Yeah.
When we knew that Mum was ill, I put an email out to my clients and I said, "I'm really sorry, but I'm going to have to take some time out. This is what's happening." I didn't sort of like just say, "Oh, personal circumstance." I said, "My mum's dying." I was just really open with people, and actually someone else, another practitioner who I work with, she said, "I took a leaf out of your book," she said, "and I, you know, it being in the same position, I've done what you've done." And people are really supportive. my clients were so lovely. They really were. You know, they were so kind. The phone kind of went dead. No. Which was nice, because then I didn't feel the pressure of people wanting to come, and once I was back in the clinic, they all came back to me. So, you know, they were a lovely bunch of people. I really appreciate my clients.
Do you think, though, that everybody knew how to react, like friends and family, when you wanted to be open? Or was it sometimes that they didn't know what to say, or you heard things that maybe weren't really that helpful or supportive?
No, not that I remember. Not that I remember. I think sometimes people are fearful of upsetting you. Sometimes people don't know what to say. And sometimes people kind of don't bring it up, or sort of, is it okay to mention it? And I say, yeah, I like talking about them. Yeah. And if I get upset, that's okay. I'm okay with it. Not long after my dad died, someone asked me a question and I answered, and then I got upset. And she said, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. And I said, you didn't upset me. My dad dying upset me, but you didn't upset me. You don't have that power. But I mean, not in a nasty way. She was a very lovely lady. But I don't want to not get upset.
That's a really good point, because when we laugh together, no one ever says, oh, you made me laugh now, or, oh, I'm sorry I made you laugh. And they're just emotions, aren't they? They're just feelings. But when someone cries and we don't know how to react like this, it triggers often something in us. And then people also I don't want to remind you, I don't want to bring these feelings up. I don't think you need reminding. You remember your mom and dad every single day. And so people mentioning them or not mentioning them doesn't really make a big difference in that way, does it? They're with you all the time.
No. And if I think my personal experience, what I've been through, really helps me to be with it with my clients.
Yeah.
As well, because you unless you've been through that, you don't quite get it. I never did. And I said to my cousins who'd lost both of their parents that I'm really sorry that I didn't understand it fully until I'd experienced it, how, you know, what it was like for you. And everyone's loss is different, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I just didn't understand the gravity of it for them.
So when your clients come to you and they share, what is their grief experience? So not only the type of losses, but do they have the opportunity to speak openly about their grief? Or do you feel like, oh no, they're stuffing it down and that's why they come to me, because they carry all this pain with them?
I think because I've been so open with some of my clients, then that they know that they can offload if they want to. And sometimes, well, I did actually have one client who, she's also experienced grief, and one day she sat in the clinic, and like within 3 minutes she was in tears, and she said, I think that's a new record, isn't it? You've upset me in 3 minutes. But somebody else exceeded that, actually. But the thing is, people know that in my clinic they can offload it if they want to, and just to sit with it. I don't say to them, oh, don't cry, I don't upset you. It's like, yeah, it's not great, is it? Just sit with it and let's go through it, be with it, whatever you need to do. It's fine. But actually, also, if you want to talk about fluffy kittens and rainbows, which another client, because she's done with talking about what she's going through, then that's what we'll talk about.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like your own grief experience has shaped your work, and you do things maybe a bit different than to before, because you sort of went through the process of dealing with your grief in the unique way you did. So do you can you see really that you do things differently than to before?
I do. I think the biggest thing is that I know how it feels, and I know So I think sometimes you think, oh, I don't know what to say to that person. I haven't seen them since they've lost, their loved one or whatever. And now I'll just say, how are you doing? And if they go, yes, I'm fine, I go, how are you doing really?
Yeah, I've done that as well. Yeah.
And then you might get a different answer, because a lot of us, we put a front on, don't we? Because you don't want to tell everybody, you don't want to burst into tears to everybody. But actually, if they want to share, if they want to offload,
yeah,
they can. Yeah, and that's the biggest thing, is that I understand it, I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you mentioned before, like when we spoke in preparation of this, about how fearful people really are to either upset someone or share. And can you talk a bit more about that? What fears do they bring to your sessions?
I think sometimes people, and I've seen that, I've experienced it myself, is that one of your fears is actually forgetting that person. And I remember, like, someone said to me, I feel okay with my sadness because it means that I'm remembering them. And I think we often have a fear of not remembering them, of forgetting them. And you think, I don't want to get over my grief, because then that means that I don't remember them. But you don't, grief isn't something you get over, is it?
Yeah, exactly. I absolutely agree with that. I was asked because we shared what we did in the week, and I said, well, I sat with 3 different clients, just sat with their grief, and then the person said, oh, and you helped them get over it. And I'm like, yeah, we don't really get over. There is nothing to get over. It's not the flu, and oh yeah, I got over the flu and now I feel better, and it's in the past. Grief is part of our life and we can process it, but why shouldn't we feel sad if we miss someone,
Yeah.
Absolutely. So when people then go away and when they come back, do they tell you that between starting to open up and then maybe they had the experience with you and then they go away and maybe open up a little bit more, how does that affect their body then? What do they report from that?
It varies on how open people are, because I work mostly in a manual therapy way, but I talk to people as I go, and certainly I can think of a few people who understand that this grief is holding in their bodies, and letting go of this grief and starting to process it certainly starts to release their bodies. I can think of one lady who said, oh, I'm in so much pain with my back. And then we talked, and I said, I think your grief is holding in your body. And she said, I think you might be right, but I don't know where to start. I don't know how to go about it. And I just sort of like press a few buttons gently. I don't work in a sort of like a just talking therapy sort of way, but we just kind of like just talk about a few things, and then just encourage people to go there a little bit, just let a little bit of these emotions out.
Yeah.
And then you can see, or they can feel the change in their body, that they're starting to be more comfortable bodies.
So what would you say to other practitioners? Because maybe they don't think that someone comes and they just like, oh, how are you? And all of a sudden that person is just bursting into tears and tells them that someone has died or so. And then if they haven't been used to being open like you now, because they might not have had the experiences you went through, what would you say to them? How could they deal with this?
I think that, are you talking about practitioners general or SERPA practitioners?
Yeah, so especially SERPA practitioners.
Yeah, I think SERPA practitioners are all pretty good listeners. And I think that's the biggest thing that we can offer, really. I wouldn't say I'm a specialist in grief. I've just been through it, and I think an awful lot of us have experienced it on some levels. until you go through it, you don't know. You just don't. You can never understand it, and I think, and everyone's experience is different. So I think all we can do is just be there and sit with people and sit with them and their emotions, which is kind of what we do a lot of as practitioners.
Yeah. So your answer shows actually that we don't need to do a special course often. We don't need to do anything differently, really. We just need to be open to allow people to share, isn't it? And just be for them in the safe space.
I think anyone who's been through a similar thing to you, whether it's grief or whether it's I don't know what else, but you kind of like, you identify with them, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think people can feel this. They can feel, if you don't have to have the answer, but that you get them, that you understand them, or we can't say, oh, I know how you feel, but there is like a trust straight away, isn't it? It's like, yeah, you might have an idea what I'm going through.
Yeah. And nobody can say, I know how you feel, because everybody's different.
Exactly.
Okay. Oh, I've got a question here from Irili. Hi, Irili. What would you say to a client who says, I'm doing some crying every day? I don't believe I have a problem holding in my grief. I'm crying every day. Okay. So, yeah. So they're kind of, what would you say? I mean, you're more the experienced expert on this, but I mean, that kind of suggests that they're kind of stuck.
Well, I guess the way I understand it is that they probably still have some pain issues or other issues, and they think because they're crying that, oh, they are not holding in the grief. But how do we measure how much grief we are letting in or out, isn't it? So and I straight away had the picture of, is that person going to the bathroom to cry, or in their bedroom to cry? Or, because we have these ideas of, yeah, the laugh and the whole world laughs with you, and cry and you cry alone. And most people in films or in general, they tidy themselves away. So just that the person is crying, that wouldn't really give me an indication that they're processing their grief, really. There's so much more connected to it than just like, oh yeah, I allow myself to cry, because that could be, oh, I give myself 2 minutes in the bathroom and then I'm done. It's like, nah, not really, So I think I would just explore that a little bit more. Like, yeah, like you said, just sit with them and let them talk a little bit more, because we can have really fixed ideas how grief should look like.
Mm-hmm.
Even a person who doesn't cry might process their grief in other ways. So there is no one shoe fits all.
No, definitely. I would say, having lost both my parents, that each one was different.
Yeah.
It was a different experience, because they died in different ways, and one was ready to go and the other one wasn't. So that it made, and one was sudden and one was kind of like took 7 weeks. So I think it was, even just one person doesn't experience all of the grief in the same way.
Yeah. And your relationship to them was different as well.
And
that can influence how we grieve as well. Do you have any resources you want to share, or just mention, and then later we can put them into the
oh yeah, that was something else that helped me, actually. One of my sisters found a podcast called Griefcast, which is Carrie Lloyd. We'll put a link in the Facebook page after this.
Yeah.
She's a comedian. She lost her dad when she was 15. And she talks about her experience of going through that, and that she didn't really understand it at the time. It was only later in life, and then she needed therapy and stuff when she started to understand what it was doing to her. But she talks with other people, mostly celebrities. She talks to a therapist, people who've written books on grief, that sort of thing. And it's so helpful to listen to other people's experiences of grief, and you can go, oh yeah, I felt like that. I didn't realize that was connected, or oh, I didn't feel that. That's interesting. Yeah, and it's not people just not being able to deal with their grief. It's like, this is what happened to them. This is how they experienced it, and this is the challenges that they came up with. So
we celebrate other things together, don't we? Like birthdays and anniversaries. And I mean, yeah, you can't really celebrate a funeral, but you can celebrate the life of the person later. And some people find that weird, that you then have a birthday party or an anniversary or anything. And yeah, I think that's why we said, oh, it's okay to talk about grief. That's why we called this talk like this, because we just need to talk more about it, I think, rather than wait till something really bad happen. And it should just be part of our normal conversations, and then we talk about something else again. So yeah.
So what's brought you
Yeah, I call myself an accidental expert, because I never thought that grief would be my passion, and it is now. I'm originally a jewelry maker and an artist, and in 2012, my friend's son died. He was 30, he was an adult child. And 3 years later, she still had to listen to really weird comments. And I thought, I want to give people like her a safe space. I could do craft sessions, but I'm not trained in grief, so I should maybe learn a little bit more. So I trained in 2016 then in grief recovery, and I've done edotherapy since then, and I've worked with a lot of people. And what I realized in the first training, no one has really died in my family, so I don't have any bereavement. But I learned that my childhood was full of losses, because I have a list. I think I have 78, no, 87, yeah, 78 losses now. So childhood abuse, loss of trust, loss of control of your body, loss of childhood innocence. There's so many losses. And I had to go through the program myself before I could teach people. And wow, it was really an eye-opener. Personally, I would have never Googled grief or help with grief. I had therapy and things like that. And being able to join this together, because these things are life experiences, isn't it? People are bullied, or they lose their job. We get older, we lose our youth, and then people die. And one loss is not worse than the other one, in a way that it's experienced 100% by people. Of course, I wouldn't say to my friend whose son died, oh, I just lost my job. And it's the same thing. But if someone, for example, had a pet and they didn't have any kids, and they tell everything to the dog, and then the dog dies, they're then scared, oh, I can't share this with anybody, or I can't really talk about this, because I know someone whose child has died, and they don't feel in a way entitled to share their loss, but they feel their loss 100%, like another person feels their loss 100%.
And we talked about it the other day, didn't we, about that it's not just if someone or something dies, but actually you grieve for other things, like you say, the loss of things in your childhood. And it's okay to feel a grief for that, and acknowledge it as a grief, as a loss.
Yeah. And even when people have the same loss, we experience that different, even in the same family. So my parents are still alive, but I have a brother. And when our parents will die, even my brother and I will experience this completely different. So even if you think, oh yeah, we lost the same person, it will be different for us. So we can never compare it. But I think we need to allow ourselves to just acknowledge, wow, yeah, that really hurts me, and that's a loss.
We've got another question from Caroline. She says, I have a patient whose father has recently died, and his father was extremely verbally cruel to him all his life and always told him he was useless. He doesn't know how to grieve, and he tells me he wants to park him on a shelf and never go back, as it would be too difficult. How can I help him? Interestingly, before you answer that, I had a patient recently who was bullied by one of her parents who's recently died, and she doesn't feel anything either. So this will be really interesting.
Yeah.
Do you want to answer that one?
Well, so the way what I learned for grief recovery in EDU therapy, we work on the relationship, and people can, like you did a little bit, write a letter or speak to the person, but it has very specific rules. And so if you don't have the training, I think I would probably share a little bit that parking something on the side doesn't really help. If you imagine a beach ball and you push it underwater, some people have small beach balls and some have big. And the bigger the ball, the harder it gets. It's, you press it underwater and then your arms get tired. And at some point you either let go and it hits you in the face, or you just feel really exhausted and you can't concentrate on anything else. So the first thing I would suggest is to explore a bit like, so how does that look like for you? What do you imagine this feels like when you just park the person? Because the relationship continues. Someone dies, they're still alive in us with our memories and everything. So I would encourage people to process their grief, no matter what the relationship was. And this not feeling, well, especially as super practitioner, we know that the feelings come up somewhere else. Then you have backache, or your knee goes, or I don't know, you get a headache. So we can't really park and suppress feelings. It's just impossible.
But it's common, isn't it? Is that you get, there are people who just really struggle to go there, because the hurt is too much. They just cannot bear the thought of trying to deal with it. It's easier. And I mean, that's the same with a lot of emotions that we deal with, isn't it? But I think particularly grief can be just so big for people that they can't really deal with it at all.
I think they can, like, you work with people with grief, and for some people that's enough. And if you have very specific clients, they probably need someone who is specialized in grief, either a specialist psychotherapist or so, or one of the grief specialists. And I can put a website in later, and someone who is like really used to deal with people with grief.
Well, I guess with this guy that Caroline's mentioned, he wants to just park him on the shelf and never go back. So he's not going to go to a grief practitioner, is he?
And that's why I said in her session with him, she can explore a little bit like how he imagined he will do this, and explore this a little bit more. And yeah.
So what does it look like putting him on a shelf?
Yeah, exactly. And then the next session asks, so have you not thought of your dad at all? Or I don't know, but it's not possible in my opinion. The grief will seep out somehow, and he might not even make the connection. He might be more short-tempered, or something will happen. So just keeping connected to the person and just explore, like, so how's your life going? And then maybe seeing the connection between, oh yeah, this person really annoyed me and I lost my temper and I shouted at them. It's like, oh, okay, tell me more about this. So yeah, just what you said, listening, having this open space with the background knowledge. We don't tell him in a way, oh, that's not going to work, but just allowing the exploration, like, okay, how do you think that might look like for you? And then later, did it work? Because I just don't think it's possible.
I think I read somewhere that if you have a difficult relationship with somebody, then when they die, that makes the grief that much harder.
Yes, we call it complex grief. So it's you have so many conflicting feelings, and often people don't really help either. If you want to share, and you like, even when the parent was alive, and you want to share how difficult they are, sometimes people say, yeah, but at least they're still alive, all these at least sentences. Or you don't even know how to deal with this at the same time, sometimes even hating them. But we are so programmed to love our parents, and it's this pulling and pushing all the time. And that's why I'm thinking that is still going to go on in the background.
Caroline's put another comment. She said, great points. I suggested he take him off the shelf and lift the lid slightly and choose one thing at a time to talk about rather than all in one go.
Brilliant.
That sounds a great idea. So just peek in the box.
That's just your answer then.
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you about, get you to talk about, was different sort of stages of processing grief. I know anger is one of them, and denial. Do you want to talk a little bit about that for us?
Yeah. So I have a little bit of a problem with the stages of grief, and actually Kübler-Ross had a problem with it as well then, because originally she worked with dying patients. And can you imagine someone comes to you and says, well, I'm really sorry, and in your case you experienced it with your mum, like you have a year to live or so, and your mum only had like 7 weeks. And if I would imagine that, I would think like, hey, no way, I'm getting a second opinion, you must be wrong. So in that scenario, denial is a logical step maybe. And then when you get the confirmation, it's like people might be really angry. It's not fair. Why should I die now? What have I done? And then if they're religious, they might bargain and say, God, if you heal me, I will be the best person ever or whatever. And then they realize nothing happens. Yes, this is what I just have this time left. This is what's going to happen. And then with her observation, they came then to a point of acceptance. Nothing in these stages of grief tells us, and I don't know if your mum ever went, if she spoke to you that she went through these stages, but it doesn't tell us how long is that stage supposed to be. Is that for people who still have a year or 2 years to live, or does it work with shorter times as well? And it seems like you go through a stage and then it's very tidy and you end this and the next one. Grief is like this, is completely chaotic. And people took her research with dying people and just said, oh, when you're grieving, this is what happens. So there were then 7 stages of grief. And there are different models again. So the first one might be shock. If someone dies, even if you expected them, your body can go into shock because it's final.
Mm-hmm.
And then you might be in denial, or no, you're very clear, that person has died now, I can't talk to them anymore. One of the people who did the training with me, her son died in a car crash, and she said, I never felt anger. So people might not feel certain feelings and then go like, oh, I'm not grieving right, what's wrong with me? They might feel guilty, they might feel relieved, but like we said before, we can't compare grief and emotions, so we don't really have stages or development. We can feel everything and nothing sometimes, and in whatever order they come.
I felt like there was a part of my brain that wasn't quite in denial, but couldn't process. I knew on every level that my mum had died, but I would go to her house and it was practically empty of all of her things by then, and I would go, so she's definitely gone then, she's definitely not here. And but I knew, I wasn't sort of like saying, oh no, everything's fine, but my brain just couldn't process that. That bit, it didn't want to acknowledge it.
My friend also said that sometimes she would laugh and sort of had forgotten that her son died, and then she would catch herself and think, oh my God, no, he died and I can't laugh. That was really difficult for her. And what you said earlier about this fear of forgetting the person then, so it can be really complicated, can't it? And telling people, oh, you have to grieve in this way, or this is what to expect, can sometimes maybe not be that helpful, because it doesn't happen then. And then they think like, okay, am I grieving wrong or so? And there's no right or wrong way to grieve, really.
I know people do worry. I've certainly had that with some of my patients. Like, well, this doesn't feel like what I thought it would, like what's been familiar to me, or I don't know if this is right. And there, like you say, there's no right or wrong. It's just how you experience it and how you deal with it.
Yeah. So the other question I know that you mentioned was about people said to you they don't know why they're still grieving after a while or so. or other people tell us, or well, my clients told me that if someone has died 2-3 years ago, and they say, why are you still going on about this?
There's like almost like a timeline, isn't there? For like people think, okay, well, it's been a year or two, so it's kind of, you know, are you over it now? And actually, we hit the two-year mark with my mum at the end of last year, and I thought, wow, it's still quite new.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a really good book, I will put that in the resource as well, and it's called The Grieving Brain. And it explains so well that when we are babies, we have to develop this bond to recognize our mom. And it's quite funny when the author said, well, when you go home from work, it's really useful to go to the right people and not just home to anybody, you know. But how do you recognize these people that you're supposed to go? So there's a lot of chemical bonds and brain changes that happened over time. So if people think of empty nest syndrome, some families are heartbroken. Their kids go off to university and they know they're still there, but they're yearning for them so much. So why should that stop when someone dies? Logically, we can say, oh yeah, I'm not going to see them anymore. But it's not only the length of the relationship, it's the intensity as well. I mean, you can live next to your neighbors and probably never really spoken to them. So you're not really going to miss them when they're gone or they move out or so. But you can have a child that was maybe a stillborn, but the intensity of your relationship has already changed your brain. Or someone who is like your parent you've known for a really long time. You cannot switch this off in the brain. And the research shows the more complex the brain is, the more difficult it is to sort of not having this yearning anymore. And she compared it with being thirsty or hungry. Just because I know, oh, I can't eat right now, I eat later, I'm still hungry. And that's the same that happens in the brain. I can tell myself, well, it doesn't matter if they've moved somewhere else or if they've died, I can't see them anymore. And I know it's a different bereavement or someone moving away, but still we can logically tell us, look, I can't just connect with them anymore. But that doesn't stop the yearning, because we are so programmed to want to see this person, make sure they're okay. And people feel almost guilty and think, I shouldn't be feeling like this anymore. And I'm like, no, makes sense.
Sometimes people feel guilty about enjoying life.
Yeah.
You know, even though they're grieving. And myself and my sisters, actually, we made some wonderful memories even when Mum was dying, and we laughed, and it made her laugh as well. Yeah. And I don't think that when you're grieving, you necessarily have to be sad the whole time.
Exactly. And I think when you sit with your clients, we can all encourage them, tell me some fond memories, tell me something funny, tell me something sad. How much have we laughed in this talk before even? And you think, oh, it's a serious subject, and can I laugh? Or would people think I'm not taking it seriously enough? But it's these conflicting feelings, and grieving doesn't mean that we have to be just sad. It's more like an emotion or a state of mind as well we can process through. And I think people think, if I stop grieving, I won't miss them anymore. And that's again this feeling guilty.
Yeah.
You will always miss them. They're not there anymore. You can miss them. The pain that is so difficult to deal with, that doesn't have to be there for the rest of your life. But yeah, why shouldn't you miss them?
One of the things that was quite helpful on the grief cast was, if you imagine your grief like a big ball in a box, and it's kind of like it's all consuming because it's the only thing in the box. But then over time, other things come into the box, and that helps you to cope with the ball there. The ball is still there, it doesn't go away, but other things from your life come in and help you to live with it.
What you're describing is Tolkien's grief model.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. And again, I like the idea more than the stages. There's another problem with it, and I don't want to sound like I'm criticizing all these grief models, but the idea is that life gets bigger around this, and what people have explained as well, like, yeah, okay, it's like I have this one grief thing that happened, but then if you have another grief thing that happens, then it's like you have to start all over again. So where we more talk about grief is just part of our life, and we can process it and we can learn how to process grief in general, rather than hoping that it never changes in size or never goes away, and then we have to build our life around again. So yeah, what my friend said as well is like you just keep going on and sort of you get used to it, but the pain is still there. It's just there are really so many different ways to process your grief, and yeah, like you do, talking with your clients, giving them the room, maybe that grief then has changed, maybe not on size but in form a bit. They feel a bit lighter, they have shared something, they realize, oh, I don't have to carry this heavy round grief thing with me, I can share it with someone like you.
And I think that helps. You learn to live with it, and remember the good bits.
Yeah.
But it doesn't go away. And I think until I went through it myself, I didn't realize that you don't get over it.
Exactly.
And that you're not over it in a year. It's there, isn't it?
I think people often think they should be like before, but I don't know, sometimes people say, oh, they broke an arm or so, and when the weather changes they think, oh yeah, I can feel it, the cold weather is coming, or so I feel it in my arm. So even although you got a cast on and you can use your arm like before, it's never like you never broke it. So whatever experience we have experienced, any loss, it changes our brain and it changes us. And isn't that also in a way beautiful? I know it's not beautiful that we experience loss, but my own experience with loss and the healing of my trauma has made me more compassionate with people. You told me that now, because you've gone through that experience, you couldn't imagine before how it was. Now you can get people. So I don't want to be like before.
No.
Yeah. So
by the way, if there's anyone listening who still wants to ask any questions, please feel free to just pop them in the chat box. So what else have we talked about?
I think we've covered so much already. I think this is just like an opening up, isn't it? That people might go away from here and say, oh, right, I don't have to pretend all the time. You said something earlier as well, that you said, well, we can't just share, or we don't want to share with everybody. If you just meet someone on the street and they say, how are you? You're probably not going to go, oh my God, you have no idea. And then you burst into tears, and then it's not always appropriate.
No.
However, go on.
And you get clever, you get good at deflecting it. Sometimes I don't want to kind of go into all of it, and you think, well, actually, yes, I was a bit down with it this morning, but I'll deflect it if I don't want to talk about it. But that's not because I never want to talk about it. It's just not always the right time.
Yeah, I think that, so if this just opens up for people the idea that it's not either or it's like I shouldn't talk about it, or if I start to talk about it, maybe I don't stop talking about it, or I don't stop crying, or if I open up for the other person, what is if they don't stop crying? These things are just not realistic. It can just open up the beginning of like, oh, okay, maybe I can talk about it. And maybe there are people who are grateful that they then say, like when you said, oh, I shared with my clients, this is happening, rather than just a polite email. And then someone else said, oh, yeah, that really helped me that you mentioned this. Now I feel I can share as well. And yeah, we never know who finds that beneficial.
And it's okay to go there, even if it's been 30 years or more. I did have somebody who'd had a loss 30 years ago, and that was part of what was still holding in her body, because it had been so long, she didn't feel like she could share it with anybody anymore.
And that's really sad, because we think time should heal, or any of the other misguided ideas we have, like replacing the loss, like you have a teenager who's heartbroken, their first love has just dumped them, and you tell them, oh, come on, there's so many fish in the sea. And something you said earlier as well about honoring the grief, just allowing it. And just thinking if all these ideas we have, and I said things to people I really regret now, is that really all so helpful, the way we have been taught how to deal with grief, or is there maybe a better way? And 30 years, that's a long time to carry grief, isn't it?
It is. I think she got some help to start with, but then as things progressed, then, like you say, people think you're over it.
Yeah.
So the longer the time goes on, the less you feel you can talk about it.
Yeah. And how do you start that conversation then, isn't it? That is really difficult. How do you, and what to say and what not to say to people is really difficult as well. So yeah, we need to have more conversations about grief and allowing people more time. And if you don't know what to say, just say, I don't know what to say. Oh my God, that sounds really challenging, and I don't have any experience with this. Tell me more. That's always a good one. Tell me more. And just, if you have the time,
Well, I think if people come into my clinic now, or actually even if they're not in my clinic, but if they say that they've had a loss, I don't necessarily say, oh, I'm sorry, that's really awful. I say, how has that been for you?
Yeah.
Because that's when I got someone coming back at me saying, I was relieved. So you don't know how that is for each person, do you?
Oh my God. And the story behind I was relieved. Gosh. Yeah. That's why we have to be so careful with what we say, because on the outside, someone can have a really good relationship. If you would see me with my parents, we have a really good relationship, because I've processed my losses with them and just decided that's the level of relationship we can have. But if someone would tell me then, oh, you must be so sad that they've died now, and they did a really good job with you, and I was like, yeah, I hear you, but that's not what I feel. I have a lot of conflicting feelings. So
I did a lot of journaling because I've been doing the circle work since 2015. I did, and Mum died in 2020. I did a lot of working through my issues with my mum when I first came across the circle work. And that put me in so much of a better place with her when she got sick and when she died. And she had no idea of what was going on in here. She wasn't a bad person, but I had my own issues with it. And it was so helpful for me to have processed a lot of that stuff before she died.
Well, can you explain a little bit more? Like, sometimes I meet people who have never heard of journaling. How do they start, like, practically, and what do they do?
So you can do what you call a stream of consciousness, which is just to verbalize everything on paper. Just write whatever you want, or you can pick topics. You can pick a particular person you want to write about in your life. What you can do is you can do like a spider diagram of all of the aspects of your life. So perhaps all of the people that are close to you, people that previously were close to you, losses, work, relationships, all of those sort of things. And then you could pick one, and you could just choose to write about that, or you can just do the stream of consciousness.
And how long do you do this normally? Do you have a set time, or?
Apparently 20 minutes, according to Nicole Sachs, I think is the golden time, because towards the end of 20 minutes you might have got to the stuff you really needed to get to, whereas if you just do it for 5 minutes, then you may not. But then if you've only got 5 minutes, it's better than nothing, isn't it? That's what I say. And don't forget at the end to write 5 things that you're grateful for, because then that kind of puts the cork back in the bottle sort of thing and stops you dwelling on the things that you've written about.
That is really a good point.
And then don't reread it. I chatted with somebody online who said, "Oh, I did all this journaling and I got rid of my migraines, and then recently I found the books and I reread them and I've got migraines again."
Sorry, it's like,
go and burn them. Go and
yeah.
burn them. And she said she was going to have a little bonfire party, because you don't want to put the stuff back in, do you?
Yeah.
So never reread it. I had one gentleman who said, "I'm going to keep all of them. I'm going to file them." Why are you going to do that? Well, I might want to write a book with them. No, you don't.
So it's really just releasing, just put it on paper, just get it out. And can people type it on their laptop as well? If like, that's probably more when they have like problems with handwriting or so, but what would you say?
Yeah, I think in the end, you've got to find what works for you. I think the research suggests that one of the best things is writing by hand, because there's this sort of like the brain connection there. But if that works best for you, just doing it on a laptop, that's better than not doing it at all. And I had one chap who was dyslexic, so he really struggled with that. But he went and used to go and talk by the graveside of his parents. So, and some people just sort of like talk out loud in the car. So,
yeah,
if you know, I don't think it's not set in stone how you have to do it. You have to do what works for you, but it's good to get it out. And for some people, maybe just like scribbling, you know, it doesn't have to make sense. Apparently, like if you do that sort of thing, that's connecting with like really early childhood.
Yeah.
If you're just doing it like that. And I got a couple of kind of like angry people. I said, "Go and get some boxing gloves," and just release it in that way. So it's just getting out really what you can in the best way. I always try and be creative with people about, okay, so writing's not your thing, because a lot of people it isn't.
Yeah. Well, I just thought I'd say something about self-care, because that's actually a form of self-care. And a lot of people think, oh, it's selfish, and they, oh, I don't have time for journaling or anything else. And I always say that, you know, the saying, you can't, what was it? Now I forgot it. With the empty cup, you can't serve from an empty cup, or you can't pour from an empty cup. And I thought, our cup is never empty, because it's either full of resentment and frustration and anger, or loving kindness and energy. And so this idea that our battery, like from a phone, just goes lower and lower, I've never experienced that. I get really grumpy when I didn't have enough sleep or food or anything. So do you have any other self-care? What
well, actually, when you mentioned that did make me think about grief, and actually perhaps very much when you're looking after somebody who is dying, is you need to look after yourself. You need to make sure that actually you're not just giving all of yourself. So I mean, like going for walks, doing some, I often get people to do focused breathing. Slow breathing is quite helpful. Meditation, if people are into that. Going for walks is one of my favorite ones.
Yeah.
Doing something that's a bit creative, or just acknowledging that you need a bit of time out and stepping back, I think.
Yeah, this keep busy or so and distracting yourself and not stopping, that can be really dangerous. Yeah, because at some point you're not busy anymore. You go to bed and it's dark and it's quiet, and then everything comes. So yeah, just reading that considering a various form of grief has been a big game changer for me. Yeah, I just thought, bereavement is grief, And when I told people I work as a grief specialist, they say, oh yeah, bereavement is really, really difficult. And I'm like, yeah, plus the other over 70 losses that we can experience in life. Yeah.
Yeah. A really good thing to do for your self-care is think about, are you having any sort of physical therapies? That's quite good. That the healing touch, like foot treatments, massages, getting your nails done, that sort of thing.
And that straight away, I can hear someone saying, I can't go and get my nails done, how can I be happy? How can I do something for me if that person just died or so, or someone else had a loss? And yeah, exactly that. These are the things we wouldn't really think that would be a good idea, and that's exactly what we just need to do then.
I wonder if you termed it as nurturing yourself at the time of your grief instead, whether that would sound better for some people. Certainly, I'd call it, I would think, nurturing for me.
Which is interesting, because we're like, yeah, I'm grieving, but how are you grieving? And maybe the quality of the grief could be influenced by the self-care we give to ourselves, the self-nurturing ourselves. Wow.
I think that's been a really good conversation.
Yeah.
So, and thank you everybody that's joined in and put notes in the comments, and thank you for Paula and Alex for checking in and saying hi. And for Lynn, thank you very much. I think this has been really good fun. Thank you, Caroline.
Yeah, and if any questions coming up, you might watch it again, or someone else watch the replay. Just keep asking, because it's good to talk about grief, and we need to keep talking about it.
Yeah, we'll put a few helpful links, hopefully, on the Facebook page as well underneath this. And, yeah, so people can watch on catch up. So brilliant. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll bid you adieu.